Hello and welcome to another episode of TelecomTV's Two Pints Problem. We're here again in the Allsop Arms pub just off Baker Street in central London, and I'm with my two regular collaborators, Ian Scales, managing editor of TelecomTV, and of course the inimitable Martyn Taylor, CTO of Metaswitch. Great to see you again, Martyn. Great to see you too, Ian. This is the season finale, would you believe it? And we're running up towards the end of the year. It's coming into Christmas time, and we have got in front of us not our usual tipples. This is Rocking Red Rudolph. Extremely strong beer, so if things start to go a bit off kilter, you'll know why. But anyway, let's get stuck into it. First question, Martyn, is this. Look, I know you sort of dropped this recently at a meeting that you were in, and I must say I did agree with your outlook on this, which is there's a whole lot of talk about in NFV about openness and how important that is, and indeed it is. But openness, of course, does not necessarily mean things are going to be free, does it? Can you expound on that for us?
Well, generally we're seeing a lot of interest in open source software as the kind of foundations of NFV. So the hypervisor, the operating system, the cloud management stuff. Most telcos have pretty much decided that they want an open source solution for that. And I think it's not because they think that will necessarily save them a ton of money, because although on the face of it that software is kind of free, it isn't really free in the sense that if you're a telco and you want support, then you're going to pay someone to look after that software and with a support contract of some kind.
Sure.
I think the main motivation, as I say, is not so much saving money. It's more avoiding vendor lock-in. The telcos see the NFV infrastructure as so critical to their future prosperity, and they've been used to many years of vendor lock-in of one kind or another. So this is one thing they want to escape from under. So open source gives them that comfort that they could, if they want, take their business to a different vendor to support them, while still keeping essentially the same software in the infrastructure. So they avoid that vendor lock-in. They're operating in a competitive market for delivering those support services, and that's clearly a good place for them to be.
Ian, one thing that's very different about NFV has been, of course, that the service providers, the operators, the telcos have been involved in this from the start. Yeah. And as we know from years of experience of writing about this and interviewing people from the service provider side of things, they really hate vendor lock-in. Yeah. And this time they're trying to avoid it for all that it's worth. Do you think it's succeeding?
It looks like they probably will. If you think of open source as being really, what it's doing is replacing what would have been concrete standards before. So they've got that. Back in the old days, they had the reassurance really that if they were doing the wrong thing, then everybody else was doing the wrong thing at the same time. But you did have very strong standards. So in a sense, if you think about a network moving to being software driven, you want to have that same sort of level of standardization in the software as well. And I think open source kind of fills that role partly too. We're all on the same track, so we feel comfortable about it. Because you do notice that when it comes to introducing new technologies in the telco area, like for instance we covered IoT recently, and some of the network ideas for IoT. Telcos won't take on outlier technologies and put them in their network at all. They would much rather it went through the standardization process, and it might take years, but they want it to be a standard solution.
Right, but they seem to be getting much more comfortable now with de facto standards. In the past it had to be, a properly written down international standards body backed standard. They know that takes much too long and is much too painful. And it doesn't actually really solve the problem at the end of the day, because it doesn't always guarantee absolute interop and vendor interchangeability. There's always some element of vendor lock-in.
But I suppose the open source repository takes the place of the standard, doesn't it?
Yeah. But the thing about open source is that it can evolve in real time.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the big difference there. So you don't get locked into some limiting factors that standards often imply.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it will stick, and I think the huge success of the NFV SIG, it kind of points in the future. I don't think, I think from now on they'll be looking at using this type of mechanism to develop other standards and things from now on, don't you? I can't see us going right back to doing the old 5-year
Yeah, I mean, I'm
cycle.
Sure, I'm not even sure they're going to bother to kind of enshrine the open source de facto
No.
standards in de jure standards. I mean, what's the point?
No, that's right.
If you're comfortable with what you're getting, and it's giving you a good open platform that's supporting lots of different virtualized network functions, then why would you bother?
Exactly. You don't need to anymore because it's an open source repository. It's there.
Yeah.
That's the flag in the ground that you're looking at. So it's been, and for that reason, I think it's been a very interesting process because I think you've seen people starting to go, oh yes, I remember right at the beginning of this process, Martyn, when we were talking on our first or second time, you spoke about somebody who you've been talking to about the product, about what you were doing, and they said, over her dead body, would they ever have any open source coming into into their network? Well, we happen to know that particular network is indeed going to be having open source coming into it.
Yeah.
So, but I think things have changed in that short period, don't you? I think there's a lot of rethinking been going on.
Yeah, I mean, they've all understood the value that Linux has brought to them, right? And so we're really talking about just extending that goodness into a much broader base of the NFV platform. Yeah.
What about the performance of services within NFV? Moving on slightly. With virtual network functions, performance is interdependent with the platform, Martyn, isn't it? Very much so.
It absolutely is, yes. I mean, one of the things that we found is, having invested tremendous amounts of resource in getting really good performance out of software built for x86 architecture, running on bare metal at phenomenal speeds, and actually outperforming products based on proprietary hardware, which is a great result. If you then take those products that perform really well inherently and you put them on a virtualized platform without really paying attention to the performance capabilities of that platform, then you can run into some massive degradation of performance, to the point where that combination of the VNF and the underlying platform actually can't match the physical network function based on proprietary hardware, and it calls into question the whole NFV value proposition. So telcos who are building platforms, anyone that's building a platform really, I mean system integrators and vendors who are providing these things, do really need to pay attention to the performance capabilities, and understand that there isn't a nice clean boundary between the VNF and the underlying platform. The ETSI architecture diagram, just shows a nice clean line, horizontal line. VNF's above the line, platform below the line. And you sort of imagine that, well, okay, but there are sort of de facto APIs across this interface. Well, yes, there kind of sort of are, but there are a lot of different variations of those. And there may need to be bits of software in the VNF that are interdependent on bits of software that are in the platform in order to get really good performance across that boundary. So we have a lot of experience in this space, and we can help people building platforms to understand what they need. But equally, we need to understand where they're headed so that we can make sure we do the right thing in our software. Yes. It's not as clean a boundary as we would like it to be.
But you would see that as marginal, though. It's not a game stopper, is it? In terms of the strategy for NFV, it's just it's something you've got.
No. It's not a game stopper. I mean, we've proven that there are techniques that you can use that absolutely get you where you need to be. But if you don't apply those techniques, you can be as much as 2 orders of magnitude out of where you want to be in terms of performance, which is quite shocking, really.
Yeah. It doesn't argue at all for there being another entire layer of almost like a network operating system between the two.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the ETSI architecture as it exists, has the right kind of breakdown and defines the right kinds of elements. It's just simply how you implement those elements.
Obviously a massive focus on software, whether it's on the infrastructure side or whatever it may be. What about hardware, Martyn? That seems to be being underplayed at the moment. The last time I was speaking to people within ETSI, which was only a week or so ago, people were beginning to say perhaps it's time we paid a little bit more attention to the hardware on this, because it's a problem in waiting. Do you think that's the case?
I think an awful lot of virtualized network functions will run very happily even today on standard off-the-shelf, Intel-based servers, and probably on other processor architectures as they start hitting this market as well. And Intel continues to evolve. I mean, it understands that it needs to keep applying Moore's law, but very specifically to this acceleration of the platform to support network workloads. There are obviously going to be certain kinds of workloads like core routing, for example, where we're talking about terabit throughputs, where a standard off-the-shelf server probably isn't going to cut it, at least for the moment. So I think what we're going to see is telcos making a clear distinction between network workloads that are suitable for completely generic server-based architectures and those that require some more specialized capabilities, which are probably more sort of core transport functions.
Let's move on to the final part of this, which is a sizable piece, and I think it's something we should go out on. I think it's an interesting idea. Look, service providers, operators and so on, and no doubt they need NFV and SDN, which we're not talking about at the moment. But what do they do now? They've seen the proofs of concept, they know that field trials are due and are going to be on the way, and that the push is on for commercial deployments and service to be available in 2016, which is what, 14, 15 months from now,
Yep.
Something like that. So how should the service providers actually get started? They get the theory. How do they go about doing this in practice?
I think it's a question of selecting the low-hanging fruit among virtualized network functions that present the least difficulties when it comes to virtualization. And there are two aspects to that. I mean, one is the data plane performance challenge that I just mentioned. I do think that problem is soluble actually today, but it may still take a little bit of time before those techniques become mainstream enough. So one approach to that is to say, okay, well let's actually avoid virtualizing things that place very heavy loads on the data plane. Let's focus on things that operate in the control plane, like IMS, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other aspect of this is around the readiness of orchestration. So a lot of telcos understand that one of the big aspects of the NFV business case is automation of operations and the OPEX savings that come from that. That automation is provided by the orchestration software. That's a relatively immature space right now. So our recommendation is, okay, stay away from virtualized network functions that have heavy requirements on the orchestration side. So for example, in order to offer an enterprise-specific VPN service with a lot of kind of value-added bits and pieces, that probably requires a lot of orchestration smarts to convert from a service order into a deployment of virtualized network functions and all of the network connectivity and so on. So maybe that's not a good candidate to start with because that orchestration software isn't there. Whereas something that's massively multi-tenanted, like an IMS network, you deploy it once. You might want to grow it, but you can do that manually. You don't have to necessarily have dynamic elastic scaling. But it's not something you're deploying on a per customer basis. You're deploying it on behalf of millions of customers, and so again, that's a good candidate to start with. And then you can build on that experience that you've got and kind of add orchestration a little bit later when you start to see how operational automation can save money. In other words, you can build a kind of incremental business case for investing in orchestration once you've got the base infrastructure in place.
Yes, which of course is crucial because the main motivator for all of this is service agility. So you're going to need eventually to move into that area just to get your return on investment, really, because that's what you want to be able to do.
Sure, but that's service agility, is expressed in many different ways, and we've got some great examples of service agility where it's simply been a case of a network operator wanting to deploy a service real fast, wasn't able to get, for example, an SBC from their incumbent vendor because there was a 3-month lead time on the proprietary hardware. We were able to provide a piece of software within days, get it up and running very quickly, and they didn't even need to buy any new hardware at all. They already had some hardware in spare that they could run that software on, and so they were in production within a few weeks instead of a few months.
Yes, yeah, I suppose so. Yes, I can see that too. But in the long run, really, what they wanted to be able to do was be agile in the sense of release complicated services. And take on the OTTs in that sense, really sophisticated services that they could get out the gate really quickly.
Absolutely,
and wow people,
Sure.
And to do that,
and a lot of them have their eye on that, but that's very much the end game for NFV. I think it's easy to lose sight of. There are actually some real low hanging fruit, some real near term gains that are relatively easy to realise.
Which are these just turning services around really quickly,
Sure. And getting off the proprietary hardware treadmill.
Yeah.
If you buy a piece of proprietary hardware, it will go end of life within 5-7 years or whatever, and then you're into a whole new procurement cycle.
Yes.
A piece of software, as long as it continues to do the job you bought it for, lives in the network forever.
Yeah.
We're going to have to call halt there, folks, because we're out of time.
Good grief.
And also, we've got to take the Hound of the Baskervilles out for its walk around Regis Park immediately after this. It's under the table here, and it's giving me a bit of, I don't know what it is that's happening, but it's doing something underneath.
Make sure you take a big plastic bag with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that's it. That's the end of this series of Two Pint Problem. It's been great fun. First of all, many thanks to Chris, the landlord here at the Allsop Arms in just off Baker Street in London, as we say, who's been very kind enough to let us sit here and warble on like this all the time and drink his beer. He's been very generous, and also generous with the time been Ian Scales and of course Martyn Taylor, CTO of Metaswitch. Gentlemen, thanks very much. It's been great fun, and here's to the next time.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah.
Cheers, chaps.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This is it. Good health. Rudolph, down your hat. Right, come on, Spot.
Out damn Spot.